So we've got folks joining. Welcome to our Community Living Campaign Art Viewing Adventures program. I'm Rodney Paul, coming to you from Lake Tahoe, actually, at the moment. So we had pretty good snow this weekend. That was fun.
How come there's no snow on the roofs of the buildings in the back, Rodney? I don't get it.
Well, because they have like really they have contractors who come in, Nick, and they they're very quick about these things.
Yeah.
And also this is from a different era. This is from what, 15th century, 16th century?
How about 1760?
Yeah, right. We're talking about my background. So I am joined with my good friends and fellow art guides, Nick Despota and Joan Foster. How are you guys doing today?
Great. Looking forward to it.
Oh, we should ask Jennifer, you might want to start recording. Oh, she is recording. I'm sorry, I missed that. So we usually have a little chat as people join about something that's going on in kind of the art community of the Bay Area. And the thing I'm really excited about, in addition to what we're going to talk about today, the Pacita Abad show, but the Botticelli drawings at the Legion of Honor Museum. And Joan, you're a guide, you're a docent there. So tell us, like, how's that show gone for you?
It's been a blockbuster. It is the only venue because the works on paper are fragile. And so works on paper don't usually stay up at the most more than 6 months, and then they go into storage. So we've had visitors from all over the world coming to see the exhibit. And there are 2 tours daily at 11:30 and 1:30. And I recommend it to everyone. You learn a lot about drawing as opposed to painting.
Well, I recommend in particular, Joan, your tour, because I went on your tour and it was excellent. I learned so much. It's such a fascinating, we all have seen Botticelli, his wonderful paintings, but these drawings really show you how his technique, how he honed his technique, how he was this master of the line. Nick, have you had a chance to see the Botticelli?
Yes, I did. I'm going back. What I really appreciated about it was that, like a lot of shows that focus on one artist, it expands the lens a bit or a lot to see the artists how they were working with other artists before that particular person and how that person influenced later work. So that's really great. The drawing, by the way, Joan, of the warriors by Palladio.
Palladio.
Palladio. I always have a hard time with that.
Puglialo, I think.
Puglialo. It's a wonderful, wonderful etching. And it's just so full of dynamic motion, and it's great. I enjoyed that as much as any work. The other thing that I noticed was that Sandro's early work just seemed to radiate a kind of a happiness and a goodwill. And later on, the paintings became darker. And I don't know why that might have happened. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, Savonarola arrived on the scene.
Yeah.
And also Lorenzo de' Medici died. And so these were almost concurrent. And it made all the difference in the work. The work changes dramatically.
Yeah.
Critics have noted over and over. But yeah, the work you refer to by Pogliolo is a fabulous, fabulous etching. It's one of the first from Renaissance Italy. And I love it. It's one of my favorites. And I do cover it.
It's a great subject because in 2 weeks on this Art Viewing Adventures program, we will be talking about the Botticelli drawings, and I'll be joined by some folks. Nick and Joan, you both know well, Charlie Goldberg and Verena Lucas, who is in the audience, I think, right now. But we're going to be talking, having like a panel discussion about the Botticelli drawings. But today we're having a different panel discussion. And before we jump into that, it is 1 o'clock. Nikki, tell us about Community Living Campaign and how we kind of fit into the ecosystem of Zoom programs that the organization does.
Okay, hi, thank you, Rodney, and welcome Nick and Joan. And I also want to welcome my special friend Tommy, who I haven't seen for a long time, but I noticed you just came on today. Hi, Tommy. So Community Living Campaign, as you know, we help seniors and people with disabilities in San Francisco. Lots of programming, but I'm excited to I was just looking at the calendar for the next 2 months, and we got some pretty exciting stuff coming up that's new. We've got stuff that is geared towards the LGBT community. They have a monthly talk now, and we have all these authors and meetings about what they have written as it pertains to aging in the United States. So that's always a topic of interest I think for any of us. You know, the good news, the bad news, the hard stuff that's difficult to talk about. So if you'd like to look at our calendar, I'll put the link in the chat. And one more thing I think might be very interesting, especially for this audience, is that on the 25th, which is a Thursday, we're doing a presentation on the history of city lights. So I think that will be fascinating. The moderator will be Peter Maravelis, who has been the event planner there, the event scheduler for years at City Lights. So, you know, talk about hearing from, you know, the authority. I think that's going to be very exciting. So glad you're all here. Glad we're all together. And I'll put a little info in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, Rodney.
Thanks, Nikki. Always
Okay.
Always very pleased that we're hosted by Community Living Campaign. This is Art Viewing Adventures. I'm Rodney Paul. We've been doing this program since I think it was like May of 2020. For some reason, we decided to start doing regular Zoom meetings at that time. But this thing has continued. It's a great way to talk about art in the Bay Area. And I am joined by my two fellow museum guides, Nick Despota and Joan Foster. And we're going to be talking about an exhibition at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Pacita Abad exhibition. And if you haven't seen it, I think what we're going to talk about is going to get you excited about it. If you have seen it, we would love to have you chime in via chat or even unmute. That's totally fine. We're not a gigantic group, so we can do that. And let's share ideas on this. But Nick and Joan, welcome to Art Viewing Adventures. Let's talk about Pacita Abad.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start by sharing the slide. And Rodney, maybe you can give us an introduction.
Well, I didn't really know much about Pacita Abad when this exhibition launched. And, you know, I found out a lot of, you know, she's a very interesting person. She's Filipino. She had ties to San Francisco. She just does these amazing artworks that are both like paintings and tapestry kind of things. You might even call them quilts. And so Nick and I walked around. We had a great time talking about it. And then Joan, I know you've done a lot of research on this, and it just seemed like a great thing to bring us all together. So anything you want to add to that, Nick?
No, that's a good introduction. You might mention that it's running to January 28th. So if people are interested, they ought to get over there.
Yeah, and also running through the end of January is the Diego Rivera Pan American Unity mural. So another really good reason to get to SFMOMA before the month ends.
So with that, I'll give you a really brief biographical sketch, and Joan knows as much or more about this than I do, so please jump in when you have something to clarify. So Pacita Abad was born in 1946, and she died in Singapore in 2004. She was the daughter of a congressman and congresswoman in a small island way up on the northern portion of the Philippine archipelago. And they hoped she'd follow in their footsteps. And in fact, she started graduate school in law at the University of the Philippines. She very quickly became politically active, even as the legitimacy of her father's election was being challenged. Marcos attempted to claim that it was fraudulent, and she opposed that. The family's home was sprayed with bullets. Here she is in a meeting with Marcos. We have an arrow pointing to her there. her parents realized that she was not very safe here, and they urged her to finish her law degree in Spain. So she takes off and for Spain, but en route she stops in San Francisco. What happens there? Well, she applies to law school at UC Berkeley. She finds San Francisco more interesting than what Madrid might offer. And while waiting for admission there, she begins study at the Asian Museum, the Asian history at the Lone Mountain College. And she becomes involved in Asian American politics and cultural activities. She organizes demonstrations. She meets the painter George Kleeman. They marry briefly. They lived in the Haight. He introduces her to the art community and to the counterculture. About a year later, after that, she meets another guy, Jack Garrity, at a World Affairs conference at Stanford. He's from Boston. She's offered a full scholarship to the Bolt Law School, but she's decided to defer that and travel with Garrity around the world, or at least to the Philippines. So for 12 months, the couple hitchhiked through the Southeast and South Central Asia. They visit Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Taiwan. They meet political activists and dissidents and tribal leaders. And all of this has a life-changing impact. She develops an appreciation of all these artistic traditions, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist. She collects textiles, which she begins to wear and trade for as she travels around and incorporate into her artwork in coming years. She returns to California. She announces she's not going to pursue a career as an immigration lawyer, towards which she was headed, but instead she's going to become an artist. Garrity finishes his studies and he supports her career going forward. He gets a job in DC. She goes with him and begins formal art training at the Corcoran School of Art. He works in the Congressional Budget Office as a development economist and at the World Bank. I love this map. It just shows all the different countries that Abad traveled through, 62 different countries. And the ones in purple are countries that she lived in. She created over 5,000 works. So she was really, really prolific, and she's exhibited in many, many different countries. After a 3-year battle with lung cancer, Pacita dies in a Singapore hospital at the age of 58. So I'm going to hand it over to Joan and tell us about this piece, Joan.
This is 100 years of freedom, and it was a work that she created to celebrate the centennial exhibit in the Philippines of their independence. So it was shown at the National Museum there. And what she did was she traveled all over the Philippines, gathering bits of fabric. Some of it would have been used clothing, some of it pieces taken from larger pieces. And she made a discovery in doing this. She was looking for the indigenous Filipino culture, what their design was, and discovered that it was overlaid and difficult to find because of all of the people who had come into the Philippines and colonized. So this work is of fabric gathered from all over the Philippines. And what she's doing is she's piecing it together in overlay, just the way the culture itself was overlaid with other cultures. So we've got cotton crochet, Chinese silk and beads, Spanish silk, Mindanao beads, all sorts of materials from all over the island.
It helps me appreciate the fact that the Philippines really is a multicultural society.
Mhm.
One other point about the Philippines I'll make is we've got Paco, who is a regular attendee at these programs. He's in the Philippines right now. I think he's coming back today. So hopefully he'll
Really?
see the video of this.
In this detail here, you could see the sequence that she uses again and again throughout her work along the top panel. By the way, this detail is of that top band that you see in the background, and she's painting on fabrics she's picked up along the way.
Can you point at some of those sequence, Nick,
Yeah,
just so
I'll get
that
it up here. Laser pointer. Here, these are all individual pieces of sequin. This, of course, is paint. These are different pieces of fabric she's collected.
You've got rickrack about the middle there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
so this is a mixed media piece, among other things.
She will often add uh, shells. She will often add buttons. As we go through her work, you will see all sorts of things, mirrors, all sorts of things added too. So in addition to painting and gathering fabric with its own imprinted, it could be wax printed design, the flowers were probably wax printed. There is just a wealth of materials.
Here's a quote that I found this morning, and I just think it's wonderful. I have to move the gallery view out of the way to read it here. My works are like inspirations from the many places that I visited and the many cultures that I see. I would go to Burma and I would pick up the gold thread embroidery, or I would go to India and pick up the mirror embroidery, or Nigeria, Africa with the tie-dye, and then all of these things I would try to put into my work.
Mhm.
But tell us about this piece, Joan.
It's from the immigration series, and it is the American dream before you enter the country and hit reality. And so you've got in the upper right the house with the white picket fence. Below that, the car that's driving on a street paved with gold, and you can see the pile of gold on the bottom there. Or the plenty, upper left, the utilities, the appliances that were available to buy, the choices that we had. And below the choices, the cart, the shopping cart filled to overbrim with food selections. Just the land of plenty, the land of dreams. And it's interesting to counter that with some of the other work in the series that brings home the reality. Yeah.
Oh, I want to point out one thing in the last image. There's a triangular building. I couldn't help thinking that might be our Transamerica Pyramid.
Possibly. She was in San Francisco for a very short time, but San Francisco would have been very important because it gave her permission to be herself and to find herself. So San Francisco plays an important role. This is more the reality. It is one thing to set out and leave to go to the land of dreams, but you have to get caught or you have to get in through the border. And here is the reality of the long waits trying to get into the country. What really draws me to this work and a lot of Abad's work is how we make direct eye contact with the person who is incarcerated behind the bars. And he's looking out, and the way his hand is clutching, I think is very, very moving. He is directing a question, I feel, at us. This piece is really a huge piece that is in the exhibit. It's about roughly 15 feet, as I recall, wide. And so it enables her to not only show one individual, but the group coming over. And I find it fascinating to look at what they're bringing. So you might ask yourself, if you were forced to leave, what would you bring? They are crossing over, leaving the war that's going on and raging in Cambodia. And they're carrying some simple things such as pots to cook or to gather water in, babies, maybe some images that are very precious to them. A bicycle, it looks like there's a bicycle there. And she gives us the individual trauma as well as the group dynamic that I feel is very moving.
Mhm.
It's very cinematic as well. I think you can almost look at it as a film still, both in its framing, the size of it, and in what it imparts.
We had a question from Nikki. Where was her work seen when it was created? And were her images transformed into any political posters? Are we aware of that happening?
I'm not aware of any political postings. The work was shown at various venues in the Philippines. Later, her work is shown in the US, of course. But I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is why this work, which could have fit into a number of movements in the US, was so late arriving. This is the first, I believe, the first retrospective of her work.
Well, let me ask, could it possibly be because she's a woman and because she's non-white? We do have to ask that question.
Exactly.
Just leave that hanging.
Yeah. It's the same old story.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And she counters that. She's very political. This one, Haitians waiting at Guantanamo Bay, is fascinating because to leave a country is not an easy decision to make. And in the upper part of this work, you can see almost a rainbow colored paradise, the pastels, the boats, the little homes, the palm trees, and to leave that idyllic setting to start a very long voyage with all of the dangers takes a lot. There has to be a lot to force you to make that move. And I think she's trying to get that here. But when you arrive and you're waiting to be admitted to the country, life goes on pretty much in a daily pattern. There's laundry, there's children to be cared for, there's cooking. When I look at this, I am reminded of the pictures of the Japanese internment in World War II and how there was the desire to normalize, to do the everyday chores in the face of great difficulties.
What strikes me here, I think is very interesting, is the citations of actual materials. So the basket on the girl's head on the right, those are, Joan, you pointed this out the other day, those are actual pieces of fabric that are ironed down and stitched to the canvas. The girl on the left, she's wearing a plastic necklace. I also really appreciate the transparency of the paint at the top where you see the boats and the palm trees. Her painting is, this is 1994. The last one we looked at was 1980. She never becomes a really adept painter in terms of her ability to represent three-dimensional form, but her technique is definitely evolving. And here there's a great deal more transparency in the water, in the beauty of the boats. There's a kind of a lyrical quality that is not present in the early paintings, in my opinion.
And it raises the question of what is art? we might have our audience mull that question. What is art? Do you have to be a great painter to be a great artist? I find that fascinating because of
That's an
course,
important distinction, for
yeah.
sure. We'll talk about that later. So tell us what a trapunto is, Joan.
A trapunto is a work whereby she painted on fabric or canvas and then gathered and stuffed it from the back and added a backing so that instead of it being flat, it expands at various points. So a stuffed canvas with a backing. And that's what she's doing here. And so it gives the work a very three-dimensional quality. This is LA Liberty, and there's been a lot of musing about what LA stands for. It could be Latin America, it could be Los Angeles, two spots where immigrants came from or settled into. She uses color politically. So the Statue of Liberty has a brown face. One arm is raised holding the torch. The other arm, a little difficult to see in this slide, is holding a palette. So perhaps she is identifying with the Statue of Liberty because there's certainly a personal touch to it.
Hey, Nick, can you use the laser pointer to show the palette?
Oh, yeah. What I think is interesting about the palette, I'm just noticing this now for the first time, is that the spots of paint are buttons. We're going to see buttons again and again, and if you look closely, you'll see them throughout here as well.
I feel like this image is a very eloquent response to that question. Is this art? Is she an artist? Because this is really, really wonderfully executed, and the way the colors all work together. She may not be technically a fantastic painter, but boy, she's creating a very interesting image, very captivating image here.
And a really, what's the word? Maybe a promiscuous use of materials. He just admits everything. That earring is an actual beaded earring. Let's look at the back of it. Oh, here's the buttons. You can see this quite well here. And this is the back of the painting of the trapunto.
Oh, I'm glad you put that up, Nick, because one of her statements was, you have to blend in before you fit. And so notice how whited out this back part, the verso is. And then on the front, the color, the great color. So you're blending into a white society primarily, and she reflects that on the backside.
Indeed. Moving right along here, Marcos and his cronies. So that's my wife Nell there standing next to the piece. It gives you a sense of how huge it is. And this is not just Marcos, but tell us, Joan, you mentioned this the other day, that's a representation of Imelda that he's standing on?
There was a rumor or a joke going around when he was working on this piece, and the joke was that Marcos was standing on the head of Imelda. And so she was working on this piece and began to add rhinestones and various sparkly things to the Imelda face on the bottom there. And of course, a reference to Imelda's extravagance and her lifestyle. It's based on a Sani medicine man mask, or a series of masks, where each mask would be used to get rid of a disease. So here, the cronies would be the diseases, if you will. And each dot in the piece related to a person who had been affected by Marcos's regime. And I think you can see how many dots there are. All of the people whose lives were influenced and touched by his dictatorship.
This is the head of the serpent that you see. Well, there's an arrow showing you where it comes from. Look at the three-dimensionality of it.
Yeah, that actually is a piece, a piece she and Jack Garrity collected. It was a cloth snake, and she sewed it onto to the piece. It actually was one of the things they collected as they went around the world.
Oh, that's great to know. I didn't realize that. I
Yeah.
love the scales too. Let me point to this. The way these overlap, these pieces of fabric are sewn and overlapped, and they're different pieces of fabric.
Imagine the time that takes. An
Yes.
enormous amount of time.
Cross-cultural dressing. We've got 4 panels here, 4 different cultures. We can step through them from left to right, one at a time. I have a feeling that this woman is European. What do you think, Joan? Go back to the wide shot here.
No, I don't think so.
What do you think?
Certainly the one on the right, the panel on the right, I think is the, this is too colorful and bright. I don't know. I don't know. But this one is clearly American technology or commercialism that is everywhere in the world. And so all you need to do is look at the label brands. And Benetton is a British, I think, brand. But the kind of the colonists versus the others.
And
I
how
think
plain his shirt is compared to her tunic.
exactly. And I think she's pointing that out.
Look at the beauty of the fabric. It's actually painted. It's not fabric behind this woman's head.
Yeah.
We had a comment from TC that perhaps we're looking at a Mayan image, maybe that first panel.
First one? Okay, let me go
Is
back
that
there.
possible?
Well, certainly the birds with the feathers and that patterning reminds me of I'm trying to think of the name of the Bonchamp. I can't recall. Bonaparte, a Mayan temple that I visited last year.
Yeah.
The face does not look Hispanic to me, though.
It's Mexican, don't you think? I mean, that blouse is very Mexican.
Mm-hmm. That would be my feeling.
Yeah,
And actually, that's a very good comment to dwell on for a minute, because there was one of the conquerors of the Philippines was the Spanish. And so they were, for the most part, operating out of Mexico and their possessions at the time in south of the border. And so a lot of the clothing design I've read that is found in the Philippines is emulated under a different name in Mexico. Pantaloons and various things, they go by a different name, but they're the same design. So I think the audience has really caught on to that.
Yeah, TC mentions we peel, and Gail says the fetish necklace on person number 1 is South American.
Mm-hmm. The
Okay.
second one looks very African in design, and I can't identify which culture in Africa, and I think that's important to know. So I am going to pass on that because she's very specific about not wanting cultures to be lumped together. And we'll discuss that when we get to masks. But it certainly looks like a design from the African continent somewhere.
Indeed, indeed.
And again, you get an idea of the trapunto and that raised form. This is from the underwater series. Abad took up deep sea diving, and she, no surprise, was intrigued with water, having grown up in the Philippines, which is surrounded by water. And she said that every time she went down, it was so quiet, so calm, so beautiful, that she always felt she had to say, "Excuse me for intruding on your privacy." And also the picture on the right, I think, captures her spirit.
Yeah.
You know, she had such great sense of adventure.
There's this painting I did not get a picture of, but you'll know it. And it's about night diving and her fear of diving. What scares me at night? And it's a huge shark with its mouth gaping. If you get to the museum to see that, take a look at that painting. It's much darker and less fluent in its vegetation than this one.
And this is a wonderful series to stand in every direction, up close, way back, to the left, to the right. I did a virtual dance through this part of the gallery because from the distance, it looks all painted. And then you get close and you see the buttons on the fish, you see the shells. It's just wonderful to explore from every direction.
I think these are the famous Indonesian buttonfish.
Mhm.
I want to call out the chat from Gail. She says, "I sense that textile arts are relegated to second-class art status, so perhaps that's why her artwork is viewed less seriously." And it makes me think about Rosie Lee Tompkins, who was at the BAMFA. You know, we are starting to really appreciate this art a lot more now. But what do you guys think of that idea that the fact that she works in this medium is maybe one of the reasons she isn't taken as seriously until now?
I think it
it's
adds.
the fine art with craft has always been, at least in my experience over the last 50 years, been problematic that we consign craft to this lesser status. Just like, was it Gail is commenting. And I think right now that distinction is dissolving and certainly dissolves in Abad's work.
Mhm.
Joan, you have thoughts?
Yeah, because in most cultures around the world, except the European culture, textiles were something that were very precious. They indicated an intellectual knowledge of the history of the textile, its background. It indicated a worldliness, and that is missing in our look at textiles. So textiles would be saved and passed down. They were precious, much as we used to save silverware and china and that sort of thing. And why that didn't follow through in European culture, I don't know, or where it was lost, I don't know. But she certainly has an awareness of that. And it's also portable. We're dealing with an international citizen, and so you can. There's a discussion about how she would pile one layer of clothing after another on her body because she was moving all the time with Garrity, her husband, and how you could fold things, textiles, and jam them into bags. So they're portable, but they're also very precious. They tell about a culture and a history.
Yeah, great question, Gail.
How many of you have ever sewed on buttons on a single piece of an article of clothing? Just unmute and call out. How many of you have done that?
Even I've done that.
It's hard.
Sure.
What kind of difficulties did you encounter in doing that? I'm speaking from my personal experience in formulating that question. What
I
kind of
think I put a
problem?
hole in my thumb.
Yeah, there's that.
You can sew it on different ways. So you can do a cross, like in the blue part. You can do a square. So
Mhm.
left to right, top right to bottom right, etc. Make a square. You can make a diamond. So there's all sorts of ways to sew them on, and each way gives it a different look.
Mhm.
I've had a real hard time positioning the button exactly right. If you lose a button on your shirt, it's important. Otherwise, the button doesn't align with the hole, right? And I try to put the thread through where the old thread was to help me align it, but it's not easy. And she's done it again and again and again, thousands of times.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed at the proficiency. Now, as Joan mentioned, craft skills were part of the basic education for women. Nell in Europe, my wife, is still quite adept at sewing and embroidery and crocheting, and that was part of her basic education.
And I think TC makes a very good comment about the difficulty. This is painted fabric in some cases, and so you've got resistance as you're pulling your needle through, and you're sewing on mirrors, as that person points out. That's pretty difficult, and it's very definitely time consuming.
I love the looseness of this painting here. She's painting on a rough fabric. This is fast and loose and vibrant.
Mhm.
This, on the other hand, is quite precise and slow. I can't tell if this is a printed fabric or how much of it is her own painting. This is from the bottom band of the European mask you see on the left there. What do you think?
Yeah,
Is that her
it's a
application
wonderful
of paint?
border.
Yes, it is. But is it paint or is it print? Or is it both?
I think it's fabric sewn on. You see the way it's buckling or would be, or it goes in and out.
Mhm.
Leads me to believe that it's part of that trapunto.
And this is painted,
Stuff,
obviously. This is
painted and then stuffed.
yeah.
But she adds things too. She sews on rickrack and she embroiders as well. So some of the work we're looking at can be embroidery. It really takes, this is not an exhibit where you can race through. You really want to lose yourself in each piece because there's so many discoveries.
That's certainly true. I love this detail. Speaking of getting up close, here we have a printed piece of fabric. You could see the printing down here in the lower right, upon which she's putting these brush strokes and then, or before, stitching it to a background piece of canvas. Here you can see this triangular piece of fabric here.
Mhm.
It's very, very rich. It's very layered.
Mhm.
Quite a metaphor for culture itself, for globalization, as a matter of fact, many people have pointed out.
Mhm. The colors are really interesting in this exhibit. The greens, the blues in this work, you just get the feeling of vegetation and of just it's just a wonderful feeling. Her colors are greens and blues and yellows, and she also uses color politically.
Mhm.
But you just
Back
get
to
the
this image. Again, I'm struck by how kind of crude and primitive her painting is, and that it doesn't stop her. I went to an art school. I learned painting, sculpture, metalworking, woodcraft, all kinds of photography, video, but I stayed away from the things that I wasn't good at. She didn't stay away from painting. She was fearless, and she used what she needed to make her point.
Mhm. And the work is often so very, very large. Some of her very early work is small, but most of it is very large. It's like a shout. Here I am. Uh,
And it's also meant, I mean, it has that public dimension. This is not personal work you get up close to. These are pieces that you could stand back from and look at with another dozen, 20, 50 people, which we'll see later in the masks that were installed at the DC Metro Center station.
mhm.
We had a comment from Sarah that she signs her name, just her first name on these things,
Mhm.
which I think we can see in the lower right-hand corner of this and some of the other ones.
Yeah, this one is signed Pacita 93. I have a date of 92, but it's about that period of time. There's a story behind this one. Do you want to tell us, Joan?
Yeah, this Korean shop, grocery shop, was in Washington, D.C. when she was living there, and she frequented it on almost a daily basis to pick up this and that. She knew the owner, Jojo, the man on the left. 20 years after this painting was made, there was an incident, a horrific incident, in which a young Black teenager, a young girl, was shot by a Korean storekeeper. And it led to a series of riots and in that turmoil of that period, Jojo was killed. He was a random pick, I guess, and so there is indeed a very sad story behind this particular work. It also points something else out in this work. We talked about the American dream and the shopping cart filled to overflow with foodstuffs, all available, but they're not available to shopkeepers like Jojo. He sold them. He made a living selling them. He wasn't able to indulge in all of them. And so it's a counter to the American dream in a way.
Yeah.
We have a comment from Kat. The facial expressions in this painting are an excellent example of her real skill as a painter. So she's really impressed by how these people are rendered in this work.
Look at the little cubes of yellow plastic that are sewn on each of the pieces of the pineapple, which give it a kind of a glitter and a reflective quality.
It gives it its pineapple-ness, right? It's three-dimensional.
As you go across left to right on this, you see three different representational techniques. Speaking of adeptness as a painter, here the leaves of green, the dark leaves, are rendered actually very economically and very beautifully with dark and lighter greens. I'm going to continue here. More fish, more buttons.
Pineapple-ness, yeah.
Different stitchery.
Yeah.
And by adding all these things, she has quite a sense of light and reflectiveness that so besides the three-dimensionality in the work, you're getting this reflective feeling in it, which is just wonderful.
Yeah, it's a very glittery, sparkly piece, like many of her pieces are. And she's really seeking that out with pieces of plastic and mirrors and glass and buttons and all the rest. So here's what I referred to earlier about the public nature of her work. This is masks from 6 continents. These are all on display at SFMOMA. This was in an installation in Washington, D.C. at the Metro Center.
As in the metro, like the trains, right? Like it's their BART.
That's
Yeah,
right.
reference the people getting on and off those trains every day that came from all parts of the world. So it was a wonderful place to situate the masks. The masks are identify Congo, Hopi, Mayan, Maori, Subali, which is Bali, and then European is very generalized. It isn't France or England, because after all, when the colonists went into the other parts of the world, they tended to say Africa, South America, with no understanding of the many different cultures in each of those areas. So here you have two of the masks.
These are marvels of design. I look at the background on the, let's see, which one is this? This is the Hopi, I believe.
Yeah.
The buttons on the dark blue, the sinuous wrapping of this orange around the frame. It's quite, this is the way this is cut out and applied right on top of the feathered headdress. It's all very rich. On the right, we have cowrie shells and
Yeah, that around the face. Yeah, that's really
mhm.
the
They're
shells are
very
really wonderful.
specific to the cultures that they're depicting.
Yeah.
The design element in the materials, so the cowrie shells for the Oceania. Yeah, she's very specific in her materials, in her design, which is fascinating. Those
And the
all
style,
shells.
the graphic style changes from culture to culture. Like look at the body on the left, which is all very geometric, triangular stripes, and the body on the right, which is very sinuous and snake-like. This is the Hopi and the European.
The Mayan on the
Mayan, excuse me.
Mayan on the left, yeah. And I believe that's the European on the right.
Yes. And this material here, Joan, you used the word earlier, it's rickrack?
Yeah, it's she would apply rickrack. She would also embroider. So it's hard to see in this if that is rickrack or embroidery, or if she has sewn something on. And that's one of the joys of discovery in this work. You have to get up very close to it, because when you're at a distance or looking at it on a slide as we are, it's hard to make out exactly what it is until you get close.
Yeah.
This could be rickrack, or it could be embroidery.
Mm-hmm. I just look at my watch here, and I think we need to move a little more quickly.
Yeah, we're in the home stretch.
Okay. Here she is in her studio, and she says at some point, I truly believe that as an artist, I have a social responsibility for my painting to try to make our world a little better. And I wondered, what was her world, or what were her worlds? And one of the worlds is the historical context in which she's working. This professor of art history from Columbia, Julia Bryan Wilson, makes this comment. And we'll take it in two chunks. It's a very academic kind of style, but it's quite clear nevertheless. White, male, modernist views about the elimination of adornment and the virtues of stark whiteness, both chromatic and racial, are in accordance with the ideologies advocating teleological progress of civilization as distinct from barbarism. So I found two examples I want to present to you of white modernist painters that were quite central to art in the 60s and the 70s. As a student at the Corcoran School of Art, she would have been very familiar with these two painters, Ellsworth Kelly and Robert Rauschenberg. This is a painting called Atlantic. It took me a while to realize that what I'm looking at are waves, as the title suggests, Atlantic, ocean. And it is so reduced, so minimal, so stripped of adornment and elaboration. And it is also, to my eyes, quite beautiful. It's about 8 feet wide. It's quite large. It's quite stunning. Robert Rauschenberg, 3 panels. This was very early. This was 1950, but as I said, this would have been part of Pacita Abad's awareness in Washington of what the avant-garde represented as being important questions like, what is a painting? What can a painting be? Well, she would have none of it. She really went in a completely different direction, as you can see here. But she wasn't alone. This is a painting by Joan Mitchell. Many of you have seen this in at SFMOMA last year, the city landscape. Exuberant, very expressive, full of energy. Lee Krasner. Now, I've picked 2 women here to contrast to the Ellsworth Kelly and the Rauschenberg. But I want to make, I don't want to put too fine a point on this idea that Brian Wilson makes, that the modernist movement is characterized by this reductionism. Sometimes, sometimes not. If you get really close, and this is one of the joys of the Abad exhibit, you can see the wondrous application of paint. Here we have Kandinsky on steroids. It is so energetic and full of motion and energy. And on the right, you can see stitched on pieces of canvas in the upper left. You can see the printed fabric below the dabs of paint on the right. I want to look at the second part of that statement. The ideology advocating teleological progress of civilization is distinct from barbarism. So we're all of an age that we can remember this quite well, and that is that the ethos, almost a spiritual project of the 60s and the 70s, was that progress was inevitable, that we were headed towards some point that in which technology would dominate and improve our lives, that there would be control over all of the messiness of the real world, and that was a good thing. But as we all know, that myth of progress collides hard with the reality of domination. At whose cost does progress come? So the second part of that statement by the art historian, by steeping herself in decoration, Abad emphatically refutes masculinist logic in order to stand with all genders and cultures who have been harshly subjugated as lesser than. She says, I feel like I am an ambassador of colors, always projecting a positive mood that helps make the world smile. So I thought, why don't we end it here so we could have some conversation about these ideas?
Yeah, we had a question a short time ago from Gail on the European mask, and she wants to know, is it block panels of woven fabric? I think it is, but can we
It is painted on a canvas. The canvas is then stuffed and a backing is put on it, and certain parts are stuffed so that it is 3-dimensional. When you go to the museum, actually, you see the front and the back, which is really interesting. A number of the pieces hang free on the on stanchions. And so you can see the front and the back of them. And there is a dialogue between front and back in some cases. So the one where the back was whited out to show about you have to blend in before you can stand out was one example.
Yep, great question from Gail. I have a question I think for both of you, and it's I'm triggered by seeing in the background from in your room, Joan, Joan Brown's catalog. In Joan Brown and Pacita Abad, I just feel like there's some kind of connection between them. They're doing autobiographical things. They're kind of this whimsical way of representing the places that they've lived. What are your thoughts on a comparison of those two?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Joan Brown, remember, if you saw the show at MoMA, the last gallery, incorporated a lot of her travels, not only to India, but to other places. So yeah, there is, indeed, it isn't textile, but yeah, there's an affinity there. And I'm thinking to the pared down minimalist work that was on the scene when Abad was painting. And her comment would have been, they've drained life right out of the canvas. You know, life, good and bad, the good times, the bad times.
Oh, got a little, let me deal with that. We get some outside noise. Okay, so Nick, your thoughts? Joan Brown, Pacita Abad?
I don't have the sense of universality from Joan Brown that I get from Pacita Abad. Pacita really belongs to the world, and she owns the world in a sense that Joan Brown seems, well, true, she did go to India, other places, but there's something very Bay Area-ish about Joan Brown, and she describes her it's more biographical, more self-centered, I think, than Abad.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Gail, I think I mischaracterized her question about the European masks. She says her question was about the block patterns of woven fabric, or were they painted block squares? So can we pull that image up and
Sure.
see if we can figure that out?
Boom.
And by the way, if there is a call to action in this program, it would definitely be go and see this stuff in person. Nick's done a fabulous job getting images into this deck that we've been showing you, but there's so much more you can see when you go in person.
Bringing us back to the masks.
And there is this, like, I really wonder at the way, that question, like, how is this done, is something that recurs when you're looking at these. There it is.
Yeah.
So
And
are the block patterns woven fabric?
So the columns on the left and the right, the narrow columns of very small squares,
Mhm.
is that woven fabric, or is it painted squares, small squares painted?
I'm pretty sure this is painted fabric. This does not feel woven. Excuse me.
no.
Joan, do you have an opinion on that? Maybe you know it better.
No, I can't remember, to be honest, but it could be a scrap or a piece from a larger work sewn on, because looking at it's irregular, and to me does not appear painted. I'm
Mhm.
not a sewer, so I don't know, but it doesn't look painted to me. I would have to see it in person
Well,
again.
let's go in person, and then maybe
Thank
I'll
you.
report back to this group. Because this conversation is really, I've seen it a bunch of times, but I really now want to go back with all the wonderful things you both have said in mind. Yeah, and I have to say, I really love those squares. I love the framing that achieves,
And you can see that the squares are irregular, that they pucker in some cases, which leads me to believe they're either the trapunto, that would do it. It could have been that she painted them and then stuffed them. But even when you're at the museum, again, what you see from the distance isn't what you see when you get up close. So you have to go to see it. And you'll have to hurry because it's closing soon.
It
Yeah,
seems like that you see every third row is stitched together. You can see stitches every third or fourth row, right?
Mhm.
Right there in the you see them?
No, I
So
can't make that out, Dragona.
I see stitches, unless I'm imagining. But again, that doesn't mean it could be stitches of something that she painted and that,
Yeah.
or it could be the pieces of fabric that she found and then stitched every third or so.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you go in person, there is going to be this wonder at how are these created, and also the vision that like puts all these colors together in these wondrous ways. I always say great art is magic. She's really truly a magician, and that was one of the things I got out of this program. Um, a comment from TC. She says the right. I think we're still talking about the European mask. On the right reminds me of the vibrant colors of hand-stitched molas from the Guna of Panama.
I would not be surprised. Because the catalog does refer to, and there are various articles that refer to this Spanish wave that came over or other waves that came over. And so you find similarities in the Philippines of that you find in other parts of the world. Yeah.
So we're at 2:00. Maybe Nick and Joan, can you guys give us some brief last thoughts on this exhibition?
Well, we haven't talked at all about color, but when you go to the museum to see the show, one of the things to focus on is color. She uses color very politically. So if you look at the hues, the red isn't a cherry red. It can be very browned down. As though she wasn't using a white underpaint, but she's using color politically, and the tonalities are very browned down, and she's making a political statement with color, as well as with her patterning and her overlay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Joan. Nick?
Her, if you think back on her biography again, the way she grew up with fear that her parents could be killed, spraying of her house with bullets, the woman is extremely attuned to the political atmosphere. And what I see, well, two things. One is just the riot of color and the proliferation of all of this technique that she's inventing and bringing everything in. But secondly, aside from the technical exuberance, is a kind of an urgency that she needs to say these things, that she has a role in the world to play. These works are large. As I said, they're public. They give a sense that you people, she grabs you by the shoulders. You people need to see this. You need to understand this. This is the world as I know it. And that's what I appreciate about Abad.
Yeah.
Yeah, well put, Nick. So, Nick, Joan, I want to thank you both for coming on and talking to us about this. It's really, I loved the exhibition, but it makes me want to go back again. And, my last thought on her is, again, comparing her to Joan Brown, they both did not live long lives, and yet they were very prolific and very, stuff that really holds up in 2024. So, and then Nikki has pointed out that January 14th, next Sunday, is Free Family Day. So if the price of admission at SFMOMA, currently $30 for adults, if that's steep for you, then you might want to go on Sunday. And we will be back in 2 weeks talking about the Botticelli drawings. So looking forward to having you all come back to Art Viewing Adventures then. So Joan, Nick, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for doing this, Rodney.
Take care.
And Nikki, any last thoughts from Community Living Campaign?
I just want to thank everybody. That was really, really interesting. And I loved hearing about the comparison between the Filipino art and the Latino art and the similarities and the colors of the birds and the large foliage and plants. I mean, all that rings a bell with me. And it was good to hear that and to see such a wonderful female artist in the limelight, at that time. And I wish we could have compared a little bit more with the farm worker movement at that time. And I wonder if she was involved in that when
Yes.
she may have come a little bit later, That was in the mid-60s when the Filipino workers were at the forefront of the farm worker movement, which took over,
Right on, Nikki. That
Yes.
definitely same timing, and she was aware. She
Yeah.
didn't participate, but she was aware.
Yeah, I'm sure she
Yeah.
Well,
was.
there were,
Good.
we saw some fruit in some of those panels, but no grapes.
Yeah. Just let me remind you, tonight is a Boomer Music with Richie the Kinks. That's at 6 o'clock. So we don't have Paco to remind us, so I'm reminding you.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to dedicate this show to Paco, who is Filipino and is in the Philippines right now, and he will really love watching this video. So,
would have loved it.
Paco, this is for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Joan and Jennifer, everybody. Thank you for all your
Take
great
care.
comments in the chat.
All
Okay.
right.
Bye, Rodney.
Take
Happy
care.
New Year.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.